It was the summer I turned 17, a sweltering July that felt like the whole world was holding its breath. I was still living in my childhood home, a sprawling two-story colonial in a quiet, leafy suburb of Connecticut, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, or at least pretended to. My parents were predictable, meticulous. Their lives revolved around routine, order, and the constant, low-humming maintenance of our perfectly kept house. They were home buddies to an almost comical degree. So, when they announced they were going away for a long weekend, a second honeymoon trip to Vermont they'd apparently been secretly planning for months, it was less of a surprise and more of a seismic shock. In all my 17 years, I couldn't recall a single instance of them leaving together overnight without me. The house, their domain, would be empty. And mine. Naturally, my first thought was MJ. My girlfriend. MJ was a whirlwind, vibrant, a little rebellious, with a spark of playful mischief in her eyes that always made my usually very ordered world feel thrillingly off-kilter. That devious streak, that constant push against the mundane, was intoxicating, even if, admittedly, it was one of the core reasons our fiery romance eventually burned itself out. But that's a story for another therapy session. At that moment, all I could think was, empty house, MJ, freedom. It felt like a once-in-a-lifetime cosmic alignment. I invited her over the second their car pulled out of the driveway. She arrived Friday evening, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder, that familiar glint in her eye already promising an adventure. The house felt different with just us in it, bigger, quieter, charged with a new kind of energy. We ordered pizza, blasted music way too loud in the living room, and felt like bona fide adults, kings and queens of our temporary castle. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn, MJ's gaze drifted towards the backyard. My parents, in a rare fit of extravagance, had installed a heated in-ground pool the previous summer. It was their pride and joy, usually governed by a strict set of rules. Tonight, under the emerging stars, its turquoise water glowed invitingly, steam rising faintly into the cooling air. I should have known, the moment her eyes lit up with that specific, impish spark, what was coming. "We should skinny dip," she declared, not a suggestion but a statement of glorious, obvious fact, her grin wide and infectious. My internal good kid alarm bells went off. "MJ, no way. The neighbors will see." The Hendersons practically live in their sunroom. They were an elderly couple whose house backed onto ours, their windows a constant, passive surveillance. But MJ, as always, was persuasive. She countered my anxieties with a very compelling point. "Come on, when will we ever get a chance like this again? Live a little." We'd gone swimming countless times, of course, but never like this. I was the kid who always colored inside the lines, the one who returned library books on time. But MJ had this uncanny ability to pull me just outside my comfort zone, to make the forbidden seem exhilarating. Her enthusiasm was a force of nature. Before I could mount another protest, she was already unbuttoning her shirt. It took a considerable amount of cajoling, a few playful splashes, and the undeniable allure of her daring spirit, but eventually my reservations crumbled. Soon we were both in the pool, the heated water a silken embrace against the cool kiss of the summer night air. Clothes lay in forgotten heaps on the patio chairs. We laughed, a carefree sound that echoed in the stillness, splashing each other, floating on our backs looking up at the tapestry of stars scattered across the inky sky. It was, as cheesy as it sounds, incredibly romantic. A stolen moment of pure, unadulterated freedom. The world outside the confines of our glowing, turquoise sanctuary ceased to exist. Let me paint a quick picture of the house layout from that vantage point. The pool was situated directly outside a set of large bay windows that formed almost the entire back wall of the living room. Because it was so dark outside and the lights inside the living room were still blazing, my parents' cardinal rule was to always leave lights on when they weren't home. For security, we had a perfect, illuminated view into the house. It was like looking into a brightly lit dollhouse, every piece of familiar furniture, every picture on the wall visible and strangely comforting. That illuminated rectangle of domesticity made me feel safe, anchored, even as we floated in our private, watery bubble under the vast night sky. It felt like we were on the edge of civilization, but still tethered to its warmth and light. That feeling of comfort, however, was fragile and it didn't last long. MJ was talking animatedly about some concert she wanted to go to, her voice a happy murmur against the gentle lapping of the water. I was half listening, half lost in the magic of the moment, when my gaze drifted up towards those brightly lit bay windows. And then I froze. Every muscle in my body went rigid. Floating there, in the warm water, with the stars above and MJ beside me, I saw the absolute last thing I expected to see. On one of the far living room walls, the one leading towards the dining room and the deeper recesses of the house, was a shadow. It was faint at first, almost like a trick of the light, but then it moved. A slow, deliberate glide. It was undeniably the silhouette of a person, tall and lean. I watched, my breath catching in my throat as it moved smoothly out of sight, deeper into the house, as if someone was taking a leisurely stroll through my parents' living room. My heart exploded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. A surge of pure, ice-cold panic washed over me, so intense it almost made me gasp. But I couldn't scare MJ. Not yet. I had to stay calm. "Hey," I whispered, trying to keep my voice even. I think my leg is cramping up really bad. We need to get out. Now." She looked at me, her playful expression faltering, immediately sensing the shift in my demeanor. She didn't question me, didn't ask why. She just saw the look in my eyes, and her own playful spark was extinguished, replaced by a flicker of fear. MJ followed my lead without a word, her earlier exuberance gone. We scrambled out of the pool, the cool night air hitting our wet skin, making us shiver despite the summer warmth. I grabbed our towels, trying to dry off as discreetly and quickly as possible, my eyes constantly darting back to those illuminated windows. No more shadows, but the house suddenly felt menacing, no longer a comforting dollhouse but a potentially compromised space. "Go to the pool house," I hissed to MJ, keeping my voice low. "Turn off the light in there if it's on, lock the door, and stay completely silent. Don't make a sound until I come back for you." "Okay." Her face was pale in the dim light filtering from the house, her eyes wide and scared, but she nodded, her usual playful deviousness completely gone. She was doing an incredible job keeping it together, a testament to her own inner strength. She gave my hand a quick, terrified squeeze and then slipped silently into the darkness of the pool house. I heard the faint click of the lock. Alone now, the weight of the situation pressed down on me. My parents had raised me to be responsible, to handle things. That ingrained sense of duty, however misplaced in this scenario, kicked in. I crept towards the back door, the one leading from the patio into the kitchen. My bare feet were silent on the cool flagstones. I turned the knob with agonizing slowness, praying it wouldn't creak. It opened with a soft sigh. I stepped inside. The kitchen was quiet, dimly lit by the under-cabinet lights my mom always left on. My first instinct was to grab a weapon. On the large wooden cutting board next to the sink, there was a block of chef's knives. I selected the largest one, its cold steel a small, inadequate comfort in my trembling hand. Holding the knife out in front of me, I began to move through the house, my senses hyper-alert. Someone had definitely been in here. That much was obvious. The shadow wasn't a trick of the light. But as I moved from the kitchen into the dining room and then into the living room, I started noticing small, subtle things that didn't make any sense. They weren't the signs of a typical robbery. A dining room chair was pulled out slightly from the table, not knocked over, but as if someone had been sitting there, observing. A framed family photo on the mantelpiece was crooked, just by a fraction of an inch, but enough for me to notice because my mom was obsessed with everything being perfectly straight. On the kitchen counter, a coffee mug, one I didn't recognize using recently, sat empty, a faint ring of condensation around its base. Trivial things. Things a rational robber, focused on valuables, would never waste time doing. Unless they weren't a rational robber. Or they weren't a robber at all. The thought sent a fresh wave of dread through me. My heart rate must have been through the roof. Every shadow seemed to pulse. Every creak of the old house sounded like a footstep. I half expected to be tackled from behind every 5 seconds, but nothing ever happened. The silence was almost worse than a confrontation. I meticulously checked every room on the ground floor. The den, the small guest bathroom, the laundry room, even the pantry. Nothing. No one. All the exterior doors were locked, deadbolt. All the windows were shut tight, latched from the inside. It made no logical sense. If someone had been inside, and I knew I'd seen that shadow, where were they now? How had they gotten in? And more importantly, how had they gotten out without me seeing or hearing them? The more I wandered through the silent, brightly lit rooms of my parents' house, knife still clutched in my sweaty palm, the more my initial surge of masculine bravado began to evaporate, replaced by a creeping, profound sense of unease and confusion. This wasn't like the movies. There was no clear villain, no obvious threat, just a series of unsettling inconsistencies and a lingering feeling of violation. At one point, standing in the middle of the living room, staring at the spot where I'd seen the shadow, I just got fed up. Fed up with the fear, the uncertainty, the feeling of being played with. My teenage handle-it-myself attitude crumbled. This was beyond me. I pulled out my phone, my fingers clumsy, and dialed 911. I explained the situation to the calm, professional dispatcher. The shadow, the out-of-place items, the locked doors. They promised to send a car right away. The police arrived remarkably quickly, 2 uniformed officers, their presence a sudden, authoritative intrusion into the eerie quiet. They listened to my story, their expressions carefully neutral. Then they began a thorough search of the house and the yard. They were professional, methodical, checking every closet, every corner, under beds, behind curtains. They swept the backyard with their powerful flashlights, examined the pool house, where MJ was still hiding, terrified but silent, and checked all the windows and doors again. But they didn't find anything. No signs of forced entry. No footprints in the dewy grass of the backyard, other than mine and MJ's. No sign of anyone hiding. Nothing. They couldn't even come up with a legitimate method of entry that would explain the shadow I'd seen. One of the officers, a younger guy, suggested that maybe I'd scared off whoever it was when I came back inside. Sometimes just the sound of a door opening is enough to spook an amateur, he said, but he didn't sound convinced, and neither was I. The other officer, older, more world-weary, just shrugged. Could have been kids, could have been anything. Sometimes these old houses just make noises, shadows play tricks. But I knew what I saw. It was getting very late. The police, finding no concrete evidence of a break-in or an intruder, didn't have much else to do. They took my statement, gave me a card, and told me to call if anything else happened. Then they left. MJ finally emerged from the pool house, pale and shivering. We were both too scared to stay in the main house alone, but we didn't really have another option. Calling our parents in Vermont in the middle of the night felt like an overreaction, especially with no proof of anything concrete. So, we did the only thing we could think of. We went up to my bedroom, locked the door, and then, for good measure, barricaded it by pushing my heavy desk in front of it. We lay there in the dark, wide awake, listening to every creak and groan of the old house, jumping at every rustle of leaves outside the window. Sleep seemed impossible. Eventually, sheer exhaustion must have claimed us. I drifted into a fitful, uneasy sleep, MJ curled up beside me, equally tense. It felt like only moments later, though the luminous dial on my alarm clock showed it was just after 4 a.m., that I woke up. Not gradually, but with a sudden, heart-stopping jolt. There was a sound. Creaking floorboards. Directly above me. My parents' bedroom was on the floor above mine. At first, in that disoriented, half-asleep state, I thought I was imagining it, maybe just the house settling as the cop had suggested. But then it came again, louder this time, unmistakable. A slow, deliberate creak, creak, creak. Someone was moving upstairs. My blood ran cold. I lay there, frozen, straining my ears in the darkness. The creaking continued, then I started hearing distinct footsteps. Soft, measured, as if someone was trying to be quiet, but the old floorboards betrayed their every move. The footsteps moved across the floor above, then towards the main staircase. It sounded like whoever it was trying to make their way outside. Adrenaline, sharp and electrifying, surged through me, momentarily banishing the fear. I wasn't going to just lie there. I grabbed the kitchen knife, which I'd foolishly left on my nightstand. "Stay here, don't move, don't make a sound," I whispered fiercely to MJ, who was now also wide awake, her eyes huge in the darkness. I didn't wait for a response. I slid out of bed, quietly moved the desk away from the door, unlocked it, and bolted out of the room. I moved as quickly and as silently as I could, barefoot on the cool wooden floors, the knife held tight in my hand. My only thought was to confront them, to see who it was, to protect something. I raced down the hallway towards the main staircase, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I could hear the faint sounds of movement downstairs now, near the front of the house. I reached the top of the stairs and peered down into the dimly lit foyer. Empty. I crept down the stairs, each step an eternity. By the time I reached the front door, it was standing wide open, a dark, gaping maw leading out into the pre-dawn gloom. A cool breeze drifted in. Whoever had been inside was gone. Vanished again. I stood there in the open doorway, looking out at the empty street, the knife feeling heavy and useless in my hand. I didn't even bother calling the police again. What would I tell them? That I heard noises and found the door open? There was nothing they'd be able to do. I just made sure all the doors were locked again, and then, feeling utterly defeated and deeply unnerved, I went back upstairs to my barricaded bedroom. The next morning, as pale, watery sunlight filtered through the blinds, the full extent of the night's intrusion hit me. MJ and I, both exhausted and on edge, cautiously ventured downstairs. At first glance, everything seemed normal, just as the police had left it. But then as I went to make some coffee, I noticed it. The knife block on the kitchen counter. It was empty. Every single one of my mother's expensive razor-sharp kitchen knives, the paring knife, the utility knife, the boning knife, the bread knife, the massive chef's knife, all of them were gone. My stomach lurched. This wasn't just a random detail. This was bizarre. Missing valuables, okay, that's a robbery. But taking an entire set of kitchen knives? That was something else entirely. It felt deeply personal, deeply unsettling. Definitely not something a rational run-of-the-mill burglar would do. We started looking around more carefully. Other things were missing, smaller, almost insignificant items. Some cash from the emergency fund my dad kept in a desk drawer, maybe a couple $100s. A few of my dad's older watches, nothing outrageously expensive but sentimental. Some random electronic gadgets, an old digital camera, a pair of noise-canceling headphones. It was a strange collection of loot. But it was the knives that haunted me. It felt like a message, a deliberate act designed to instill fear, though I couldn't for the life of me figure out what that message was supposed to be. Why the knives? Were they planning to come back? Was it a threat? The questions swirled in my head, making me feel sick. When my parents came home later that day, tanned and relaxed from their Vermont getaway, their good mood evaporated the moment they saw our faces and heard the story. I expected anger, accusations, maybe even a lecture about having MJ over. But to my surprise, they were incredibly understanding, almost subdued. My dad checked all the locks, his face grim. My mom just hugged me tightly. I'm not one to scare easily, never have been. I've always been pretty level-headed. So this whole experience, as bizarre as it was, didn't leave me with crippling fear or recurring nightmares, not like it did for MJ, who refused to even step foot in my house again. But even now, years later, I still sometimes acknowledge how profoundly strange it all was. The shadow, the locked doors, the silent intruder, the vanished knives. I was never able to figure out how that person had gotten inside, or where they could possibly have been hiding while the police meticulously searched every inch of that house. It's always going to be one of those odd, inexplicable things that just sticks with a person, a little sliver of unease tucked away in the back of your mind, a reminder that sometimes things happen that just don't make any sense at all. Fast forward a couple of years. College. Rowan University to be exact. For anyone who doesn't know, Holly Bash is our big spring festival, kind of like Rowan's own mini Coachella. It happens every April right on Holly Bush Green, near the historic mansion. Carnival rides, food trucks, lawn games, and always a surprise concert headliner. The whole campus basically shuts down and shows up. It's supposed to be the most fun, carefree day of the year. I was a sophomore living in Chestnut Hall, one of the older dorms. Like pretty much every other student, I stayed out late that Holly Bash night, soaking up the atmosphere, hanging with friends. Rowan's campus is in Glassboro, New Jersey, which is generally a pretty quiet, suburban town. It doesn't really feel dangerous, even at 2 in the morning. You get lulled into a false sense of security. That's probably why I didn't think twice about leaving my friend Dave's dorm in a different hall and starting the walk back to Chestnut alone. It was around 2:30 a.m. The main festivities had wound down, but there were still people milling about, the air still buzzing with a faint, lingering energy. What I didn't know, what I only found out later, was that earlier in the night, around 12:30 a.m., there had been reports of a group of masked individuals, maybe 10 or more of them, causing trouble. They'd been seen banging on dorm doors, riding bikes erratically around campus, some even spotted outside Chestnut Hall. I never saw any of this firsthand. Apparently, it was alarming enough that people were posting about it on YIKYAK and other campus social media while it was happening, warning others. But I wasn't checking any of that. I was just tired, a little buzzed, and focused on getting back to my bed. The walk from Dave's dorm to Chestnut was maybe 10 minutes, cutting across a couple of quads, past darkened academic buildings. The campus was quieter now, the sounds of distant laughter and music fading. I reached Chestnut Hall, swiped my student ID to get in, and the heavy door clicked shut behind me. The lobby was deserted. I started walking towards the main staircase, my footsteps echoing slightly in the quiet. That's when I noticed someone sitting in the first floor lounge area, just off the main corridor. This by itself wasn't weird. It's a college dorm. People are up at all hours studying, gaming, whatever. But this guy, he was wearing a mask. Not a COVID mask or a silly party mask. It was a full-on black ski mask, the kind that covers your entire head except for your eyes. And he wasn't doing anything. Not reading, not on his phone, not even looking around. Just sitting there on one of the worn-out couches, dead silent, facing the hallway. It took my brain a second to process the sheer incongruity of it. I actually paused near the entrance to the lounge, kind of frozen, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. It just didn't make sense. What was he doing there? Why the mask? It genuinely freaked me out. And then, in one quick, fluid motion, he jumped off the couch and turned towards me. I didn't even think. I just ran. Block 8. I bolted down the hall, away from the lounge, my heart hammering against my ribs. I ducked into the nearest bathroom, the men's room, and slammed the heavy door shut, fumbling with the lock. My breath was coming in ragged gasps. I pressed my ear against the door, listening. I must have stayed in there for at least 5 minutes, maybe longer, every second stretching into an eternity, expecting the door handle to rattle, expecting him to come after me. But all I heard was the hallway slowly go completely silent again. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. Just the hum of the fluorescent lights in the bathroom. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but my gut was screaming at me that something was very wrong. This wasn't just some weird prank. Eventually, I worked up the courage to crack the door open, just a sliver, and peek out. The hallway was empty. Fluorescent, sterile, and empty. I thought maybe he had left, given up, whatever he was doing. I stepped out cautiously. I didn't want to sprint down the hall and freak myself out even more, so I just started walking as normally as I could towards the other exit of the building, the one at the far end of the corridor. That's when I saw him again. He was still in the lounge. Still masked. But this time he was positioned directly across from the path I had to take to get to the exit. His bike, a beat-up mountain bike, was leaned against the door frame of the exit, and there was a lounge chair wedged between the wall and the door itself, like it had been deliberately jammed there to make it harder to open. He was blocking my way out. My hand instinctively went to my keychain. I had a small canister of pepper spray on it. I pulled it out, my fingers slick with sweat, and held it in front of me, pointed vaguely in his direction. I didn't aim it directly, didn't say anything threatening. I just showed that I had it, hoping it would be enough of a deterrent. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I had to walk right past him. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't even flinch or move a muscle as I walked by, just inches away. He just sat there, his masked face turned towards me, watching. It was like he wanted me to see him, like my fear was the whole point. I didn't look back. I reached the jammed door, gave it a hard shove, and it finally burst open. I stumbled out of the building and into the cool night air, my legs feeling like jelly. I was about halfway across the quad, heading towards Magnolia Hall where more of my friends lived, when I heard it. The whirring sound of bike chains. Behind me. I glanced back and my stomach dropped. 3 more masked figures, all on bikes, were riding up quickly behind me. They flanked me, one on each side, one slightly behind. They didn't touch me, didn't try to grab me. But they started heckling me, laughing, saying things I couldn't quite make out, their voices muffled by their masks. It sounds almost harmless on its own, right? But a couple of them were waving around what looked like handguns. Small, dark, metallic. They could have been fakes, airsoft guns, even. But in that moment, at nearly 3 in the morning, with my adrenaline already through the roof, they looked terrifyingly real. It was clear they were trying to intimidate me, to scare me. I tried to ignore them, to just keep walking, but I could feel how close they were riding, just barely out of arm's reach, their presence a suffocating, menacing bubble. I finally made it to Magnolia, a better lit, more populated dorm. I practically dove inside and frantically texted my friend Mark to come meet me. He walked me back to Chestnut, and by then, thankfully, the bikers were gone. I didn't call the police that night. I wasn't physically hurt, just really, profoundly scared. I couldn't even fully explain why it had been so terrifying. It wasn't until the next morning, when the fear had subsided into a cold dread, that I told my mom everything. She ended up reporting it to campus security and the local police. Later that night, some of my guy friends texted me. They'd also been approached, intimidated by a group of masked guys on bikes. A few of them had also had what looked like guns pulled on them. Nobody was hurt, but it was enough incidents that campus police finally started taking it seriously, increasing patrols. I've heard a lot of rumors about who those guys were. Some people think it was just a bunch of local high school kids trying to scare college students. Others think it was something more organized, maybe even gang-related, though that seems unlikely in Glassboro. It's just the gun detail that still freaks me out. The thought that a group of potentially armed non-students had somehow made their way into my dorm building that night, the place I lived, the place that was supposed to be safe. I've been scared to walk home alone on campus ever since. That fun, carefree Holly Bash feeling? It was gone. Replaced by something cold and wary.